Corinne Jola travaille à l'université d'Abertay en Écosse. Elle s'occupe de la représentation et de la perception du corps humain à l'œuvre. On pourrait prendre la terminologie employée dans ces colloques, et en particulier du corps humain en mouvement. De ces corps performatifs, elle n'a pas seulement une expérience en tant que neuroscientifique, mais aussi en tant que danseuse et chorégraphe. Elle a donc une connaissance incarnée, ainsi en tant qu'observateur et comme performeur. Son intervention Embodied Neuroscience Making Sense of Dance pose la question du contexte et de la temporalité dans l'expérience esthétique et donne un exemple de comment aborder l'interdisciplinarité, si on peut utiliser ces mots. Corinne Jola, qui a déjà travaillé à Paris, effectuera son intervention en anglais, mais elle est tout à fait disponible et prête à répondre aux questions en français. Je vous donne la parole tout de suite et je vous remercie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've really enjoyed myself so far. I hope you too. And I'm going to talk about embodied neuroscience making sense of dance. And with embodied neuroscience, even though we did research on embodiment when watching dance in the Dance Spectator, what I mean with embodied neuroscience is much more the neuroscientist's knowledge of the practice that he's studying. So actually embodying the subject of research rather than just using stimuli that there might be a lack of knowledge that might lead to some methodologies which are not appropriate. And as Chiara said, I have a background in dance and neuroscience, but I'm not so much of a performer, so I perform much more often in science when I give presentations, like now. But in dance, I like to be in the background and choreograph pieces. I think there are other people who are much better in performing than I am. But here are two images of some research groups that really strongly influenced my way of doing research. One is interdisciplinary. It was called a research project with neuroscience parts in Glasgow and some qualitative audience research in Manchester. And it was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, has finished quite a while ago, but we have still lots of work to do. But you can see here what I like about this comparison is here's a dance company that here Frank Pollock, who is the professor, and myself, who were kind of dancing with the performers, while here you see the dancers from a dance company sitting down and doing really some thinking research. So I really like to see more of that kind of taking on the opposite roles. And this dance company is Emilio Greco in Amsterdam. And I've been collaborating with them since 2006, sometimes more, sometimes less. But it really has much informed my way of thinking and taking part. At some point, I also took part in their rehearsals for 3 months period, which then really informed my way of looking at research and defining how I have to do new research experiments. But I'm not going to talk about these studies today. I talk about 2 others. Here an example of a dance piece of mine that I choreographed, and that was in 2013. And here I really looked at trying to kind of work on the quality of movements. And I used the theme of the particles that they found that the particles from the universe, some particles are faster than others. So I kind of used just a way of looking at what physics is doing and finding research, so what is the science doing, and how can I then embody. But this is not really how I look at dance. Dance should not kind of just be an analog of scientific results. But that's one way of working at it. And the audience liked it quite a lot and invited me the following year to do another piece where I looked more into the theme of a relationship I had with a friend of mine, a musician I met by coincidence in London, etc. But I was much more working on a theme of shared memories, etc. And this was much less liked by the audience at this piece. It had many issues with lighting, the sound was not adjusted really well. This is important because and I come back to this point many times, like in science, when you design experiments and you run experiments, the same way in dance performance, you really have to rehearse. You have to have time to do it several times, and you have to make it run properly. And this is kind of a parallel, an analog between the 2 areas. And so I'm not reading you this review, or I can say, Simone said, the result is a good one, and then of course, point, I take out the things they said bad. And the musician's tender lyricism matches that of the movements until O'Connor, who is the musician, let rip and pulls away. So maybe I broke the flow a bit too early for the spectators. But why I'm showing this is really at the end of her review on the piece, the reviewer said, the duet between Lee and Adam, who are the dancers, seems to be a dream or distant memory, surreal and light, intangible but lingering. And that is exactly what I wanted to do with this piece. So for me, this is a way of just showing, even if you can make sense of dance, you might still not like it. But for me, that was kind of good enough, so I didn't care whether the reviewers liked the piece or not, because they really got what I wanted to kind of transpire to them. So that made me happy. I wasn't too concerned about the bad review otherwise. And here's just an example of this morning when we were talking about what is a piece of art. For me, a piece of art is, or a piece of science, in the ideal world should be the same thing. So here is a new project I'm working on, where I also got a residency in Glasgow with Jan Lee on this picture performing. And we measure different parameters of her bodily responses to autobiographical memories of pictures of her childhood. And at the same time, as I want to create a performance, I want to inform my research on the theme of autobiographical memory and emotions, and with some feedback mechanisms, work on how can you actually change the emotional experiences you have from the past, and how this then in an advanced work can be used for kind of clinical treatment. But that's really the far future. At the moment, I want to use this idea from research while at the same time creating a dance performance. So a dance performance, there was something mentioned this morning about science outcomes and philosophy outcomes. And when I think of the work I'm interested in, I want to have my science outcomes and my performance outcome triggering similar responses in the spectator. So for me, the outcome is not necessarily just significant data, but what it does to the reader, or a dance performance, what it does to the spectator. So I'm trying to achieve kind of the same level of outcome with both. But of course, I'm not there yet, nowhere near. But this is what interests me. So this is kind of an introduction to my choreographic background. Most of the research that we conducted in this interdisciplinary research project in Glasgow, I mentioned, is really kind of triggered by these mirror-neuron findings that we heard before from Alessandro, and she probably could talk to you through this much better than I, because she's a particular expertise in this type of research. But what I can tell you is, again, that if a monkey observes an action being executed by the experiment and the monkey is passive, the same neuron that is activated and firing is also firing, but of course much stronger if the monkey does the action himself. And this kind of similarity between the activation is then seen as this could be the potential basis for action understanding. But that's kind of already a next step of interpretation. So the neuron mirrors, so this type of neuron mirrors the behavior of the other as though the observer were itself acting. And the mirror neuron network in monkeys are here in the frontal area and inferior parietal area. But in humans, it's a bit more difficult to study, as we already heard, because very often you do these studies on brain activation in the scanner, and the scanner is a really enclosed space, so you cannot move much. And some people with claustrophobia cannot even go in because it's too enclosed for them. But otherwise really safe if you adhere to the procedures. The mirror neural network in humans is frontal, ventral premotor, inferior parietal, but also in some other sensory areas. Although it has to be said, not in all the studies on action observation, they found these all of the three areas, particularly not necessarily the somatosensory. What is important, and I come back to this a number of times, is in the monkey studies, what is required to activate these neurons is an interaction between a biological effector, like the hand, grasping, or the mouth, where it's going to, and an object, like a knot or something. What doesn't matter is who is doing the action, the grasping, what object it is, whether there is a reward or not, doesn't matter for the monkey to have activity in these neurons. The visibility of the goal, or even the viewing distance, whether that's close by or further away, does not matter. And I will come back to that later. So here an example of a study I like to cite for mirror neural network in humans. Although Gazzolo and Kaisers did this study in the scanner, they had individual subjects' brain activity mapped for actually when they execute an action, as well as when they just watch on video the very same action. So this study I like to cite because it's one of the few that really compares action execution with action observation. In most studies, it's only the action observation that is observed, and then it's referred to as the mirror neuron network or mirror neuron mechanism, while it should rather be said it's the action observation mechanism. It's not compared between executing and observing. But in this study it is. So they had simple hand movements grasping objects. And they found, again, premotor, as I already mentioned, some visual areas, which is activated for visual motion, somatosensory, which they explain as when you're doing an action, this area gives you the feeling of how it is to do the action. When you passively observe an action, this area is kind of giving you the sensation of what it would feel like if you were doing this action, which is slightly different from premotor, which is more of the programming. And then we have BA44, which is more of the frontal areas, which also, due to time restrictions, I'm not going to talk much about it today. And then here, as a contrast, the neural network in humans, or sorry, in dancers, not in humans, that's what you saw before. This is one of the seminal studies on using mirror neural network ideas in studying dancers. And Beatrice did this study because she wanted to use dance as an object, unrelated activity, and to see whether you have, if you have expertise in doing this action, which does not require an object in contrast to all the other studies, do you then show more response because you're an expertise in executing this action than if you are not an expertise in executing this action. So she had capoeira dancers and ballet dancers in the scanner watching capoeira or ballet movements. And also she compared both of them with novices who don't who are not trained dancers. So she had videos showing, it was actually these ones in her first experiment, where she had videos of capoeira movements and videos of ballet movements. And I like to refer to them rather as ballet actions or capoeira actions, because due to methodological issues in scanning experiments, these videos were really short. So the movements were only 3 seconds. But if you go and watch dance, you want to see more than just 3 seconds. So that's an important aspect, violating ecological validity, which in a number of studies that conducted later shows that if we really use longer stimuli and find different ways of analyzing the stimuli, you also might find different kind of results. But she found similar areas of the mirror neural network, premotor, IPS and STS, which is often activated for body movement, biological motion here as well, and some frontal, but definitely less than what we saw in the study before. And I forgot to say, so red is the activation, which is stronger if you watch the movements you're expert in. So ballet dancers watching ballet movements, or capoeira dancers watching capoeira movement. And it didn't end with this study here. What fits much better to today was the following up study where I was involved. And we asked the novices to come back a year later to rate the dance actions on aesthetic value. So how much did they like the different movements, the ballet movements and the capoeira movements? And when we then related the brain activity of those novices with the responses they gave on how much they liked these movements or actions, then we get two areas activated, visual areas and motor areas. So there are visual responses and motor responses enhanced for those movements you like. But I go back to what I showed you earlier. While for monkeys, it's required to have a biological effector and an object, you don't have to have that in dance. But what is in dance, much more important, is the type of movement. Whether you do a movement which is a simple movement or a difficult movement, or whether you do a movement that's translational or in the vertical, has a huge difference on how it is perceived and how the spectator responds to it. And these are really things that you learn when you're in a dance class and you participate. That's the first thing you learn. The type of movement is really crucial. They're not the same. And I'm going to talk about presence today as well, but not the others. So we looked at the stimuli, and I insisted to do that. And we did it to a certain degree to analyze which movements were liked more and which movements were liked less. And the movements that were liked more were movements that had the displacements in the vertical, and movements that were liked less were displacements in the horizontal. So there is a type of movement who has a different response in this particular experiment for the subjects and how much they liked it. And this triggered the brain responses we found related to how much activity there is for movements they like more. So most likely for the vertical movements. But of course, you cannot do a choreography just with vertical movements. That would get boring after a while. So this was the first part where I talked about the type of movement. The next part, I wanted to talk about the presence and the viewing distance. And I have to make that quite fast because of time. Notably, there are some techniques where you don't have to lie fixed in a scanner, where you can take the machine out into the theater like we did here and test it from the distance, or where you can compare the response of the spectator watching the video, the dance on video, like in a very normal laboratory setting, or in a sense that we did. And we did the two and compared them. The technique that we were using is TMS, which stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. And here you just see some impressions of this, how it looked like in the live situation. And more some examples of how experiments normally look like when they try and control for all potential confounding variables. And basically, this magnetic coil just triggers an electric signal. So if I move my arm, it's basically the same what happens internally. But in the case of TMS, you stimulate from the outside, and you have a sub-threshold motor response. So it's at maximum a little twitch, not an actual movement. But this little twitch can be measured. And this is the artifact from the TMS. And in red, you have an enhanced motor evoked potential, how it is called, and in blue, reduced. And we know that it's enhanced from many other studies. If you think about movement, if you prepare movement, if you read about movement, but not if you're at rest, then it's reduced. So basically, we did that with different types of visual expertise spectators, ballet, Indian, and novices, live when they watched these different types of dance, ballet, Indian, and an acting control condition. And I go directly to the study of presence. When we looked, we did the same experiments with another group of novices in the lab later, and only compared novices' response who are not trained in dance when they watch dance on video in the lab, like we normally would do in cognitive neuroscience, with the results we had from when they watched it live. And what is for me really important is that they reported, when they were asked in the questionnaire later, they reported higher levels of enjoyment and no significant differences in enjoyment rating across performance type for the live condition. So in black you have the live condition, and here the subjective enjoyment ratings, and they are not significantly different for the three different dance conditions. So whether you watch ballet, Indian dance, or acting live, you enjoy them equally in this study, the stimuli we used. But if you watch them on video, you enjoyed ballet much more than Indian or acting. So there is a difference in enjoyment when people watch those videos, those dances on video, but not when they watch it live. Meaning, if we would just do the normal way of studying spectators in the lab, we would have a confound with their enjoyment on their motor responses. Yeah? And in the live conditions, we saw that even novices had strongest responses to Indian dance. And the Indian dance, although the gestures are not understood for our culture, they are like everyday gestures, and we recognize them as gestures. So even novices who are not trained, who even don't understand the gestures, they show enhanced responses when they see the performance live. So the type of movement and the presence are really important, and these are factors that you notice instantly if you participate in dance. And I'm not going to talk about shared experience, but it's another really important aspect in participating dance, and the respiration, which then as a dance spectator becomes evident on how you respond to it. So this is the final slide. What is the overview and outlook of what I was talking to you in these 30 minutes? The participation in the field of study allows defining more appropriate methodologies for research. And maybe I was too confident in writing this. I should have written, forces you to find new ways of designs and methodologies that are appropriate enough to study what you want to study. Because not in all cases we have achieved that. And I was talking to you a little bit about the background of the mirror neuron network in dance observation, like how physical, and I left this out, visual experience, modifies brain activity in passive spectators. But most importantly, I tried to convey to you two specific examples that show that participation in the research topic, so what you experience when you participate in the field, has implications for future studies. And one of them is really be sensitive of the movement direction as a potential modifier of your experiments. So enhance kinesthetic sensitivity for vertical movements with dance experience. But even with non-dance experience, but what is very clear when you participate in dance, that the presence is so important. It's different whether you dance in front of the television or whether you dance with other people in the same space. That enhanced sensory motor responses are found for live gestures, even in novices. And there's a whole lot of people here that really helped to kind of, to allow me to go along this way, and of course you as well. Thank you.